And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Tyler Kiwala, ET experiencer, independent researcher, and passionate disclosure activist. Shortly after his mother's passing in 2011, he ended up with an intense paralysis and visitation from shadow people. This would lead to experiences with inner earth beings, Sasquatch, Greys, and more. Tyler, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Let's start with what happened to you right after your mother transitioned.
So in 2011, nothing, my awakening or any of that hadn't started yet. I was just a normal person. I worked construction and whatever. I was kind of living a party life in a way. And my mother suddenly passed away overnight. It was unexpected. And what I wasn't expecting after that was that I immediately started experiencing these sleep paralysis attacks and these night terrors and these things that were just like, prior to that in my life, none of that had happened to me. I actually didn't know much about it. And the very, very first thing that happened was a levitation experience out of my bed. And I write about it in actually my new book that I just released 2 weeks ago. But I tell that story in great detail. But I was basically laying there in bed, falling asleep to a Seinfeld DVD because the house I was staying in didn't have cable. I kind of just moved in with these, it was my cousin and his friend, and my mom just passed away. And I was laying there. I had to work the next day. And next thing I know, my remote is just laying to the right of me in bed, and it starts floating. And I don't even know, like, if I'm dreaming, if I'm awake, or what's going on, because you don't process it. You don't actually, like, it doesn't register immediately. And it starts getting higher and higher. And I'm like, well, I better grab that. And I go to grab it. And then I start floating out of my bed with it. And at this point in my life, the only thing I had heard of was out of body experiences from watching some of those cable shows or whatever. And I thought I was having an out of body experience. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. At first, like, it didn't really register what was happening. And I was getting closer to the ceiling, and uh eventually somehow I managed to, like, actually spin myself around in the air. And I was looking into I ended up catching a glimpse of myself in the mirrored closet doors at the foot of my bed. And that's when I started to panic because I wasn't in my bed. Like, my physical body wasn't in my bed. I could see myself hanging there, like my arms and legs were kind of hanging down, and I could see the TV remote next to me. And that's when I started to panic because I thought, oh, this is real. This isn't a dream. I'm not, like, floating out of my body. So I start, like, basically swimming, doggy paddling, whatever, just trying to get back down. And it was working. And somehow I was making headway. And as I got closer to the bed, something took over my body, like, and just basically some, like, dark, I don't know, some presence. I couldn't see anything, right? And I was basically, my arms and legs were, like, crossed, and I was, like, spun around and slammed down into my bed. And, like, it felt like somebody was sitting on top of me, but I couldn't see anything. And I didn't even know really about sleep paralysis at the time. So I had no frame of reference for what was going on. And I thought something was killing me. I remember thinking very vividly that somebody was going to walk in and find me dead the next day, because I couldn't move my body. I couldn't scream for help. If anybody's experienced sleep paralysis, they understand what that's like. But this was beyond, like, any episode I've had since then. It was so intense because it was the first one I didn't know, and I was just fully enveloped in fear. So I couldn't break free to save my life. And I'm trying to scream for help. You can't do anything but, like, move your eyeballs and breathe, and you're lucky to even be able to breathe. And I started panicking, and then something came over me and something came over me, and I just told myself to calm down, and I started giving myself a pep talk. And I'm laying there, like, paralyzed, stuck like this, and I'm just giving myself this pep talk. I'm like, come on, just move your legs. You can do it. You can do it. Come on. It's easy. Just get up. Like, what's wrong? Well, just, come on, Tyler. I'm just, like, giving myself this pep talk in my head. And somehow I find it within me to just break free from it. And I jump out of bed and I run down the hallway into the kitchen. And I look back. I'm like, holy, what just happened? And I waited for, I don't even know how long I stood out there, like, out of breath. I was terrified. I mean, I was quite literally terrified, and I finally crept my way back down the hallway. I peeked around the corner into the room, and everything seemed fine. And I finally like felt comfortable enough to get back into bed. I never even turned the lights back off, and I actually forced myself to stay awake all night. And I remember laying there, and I started just bawling my eyes out in bed because my mom had just passed away, like just like a week prior or whatever. It was very soon before that. And then this thing happens to me, and like this just shattered any belief that I had about reality and what was possible. Like I couldn't even comprehend, I couldn't even fathom what just happened to me. And I just started I broke down in tears, and I was just like, what's happening to me? And I was actually terrified. And that was the very first experience of many more to come after that.
What do you think the correlation is between your mother's passing and this event?
That's a brilliant question. So I didn't know for years, actually. I wanted the same thing. And it wasn't until I got further down my awakening path and started meeting like energy healers and psychics and channelers and all these people that you can like work with and try and get some answers. I had a session from a trusted source, a channeler, which believe me, just take channeled information with a grain of salt. But this is like I was looking for answers, and that's why I was booking sessions with all these people. And what came through surprised me, yet I wasn't surprised. It made sense. They said through that session that it was my higher self, by the way, that this man was channeling. That was like the whole session. And he said that, we're living in a time on this planet where it's a war for everyone's soul. It's a war for the soul. And he said they don't just stop going after your soul. They go after our soul while we're alive. And there's like that's a whole other conversation. But he said that upon her transition, they were trying to trap her soul. And they were using me as bait to try and lure her in because they knew they wouldn't be able to see. They knew that she wouldn't be able to stand seeing her son suffer like that. And they were trying to, lure her in and use me as bait to trap her. And apparently it didn't work because, I feel like I've had my mom show up many times since she's passed, and I'm validated it's her and that she's okay, and that's it's been a very beautiful thing since then. But that was the only explanation I ever got that made any sort of sense because I just didn't understand like why it happened overnight. And then somebody else told me like, well, what if there was like this entity attached to your mother, and when she transitioned, it just attached to you? I guess that's also possible. Bottom line is I don't actually know. I can only speculate. But it was real enough, and it, like I said, it was the first of many experiences to happen like that. And I was 20, I turned 25 right around that time. I was 24 when she passed away. And I eventually, um, I turned 25, and I was I remember being afraid of the dark all of a sudden. I was afraid to go to sleep. I was afraid of the dark. I wouldn't watch scary movies anymore because this stuff was happening so often, this paralysis, and not just paralysis, but I mean, just the dreams and the night terrors that came with it. Everything, I was kind of suffering in silence for a while until I finally opened up to my father about it. And that's really whenever the healing journey started. When I finally opened up about it, then the universe kind of provided me with these opportunities to actually heal myself and break free from that. So it's a whole story, but that's kind of what happened.
Now, at the beginning of this event that you had, you noticed that you were up in the air and then you started, swimming to get back down. So at that point, you weren't paralyzed, but when you did go back into your bed, you became paralyzed.
Something I was like making my way back down, and something it literally felt like something just took control over my body. Like I just like it literally my arms and legs like were just crossed, and I was like spun around and slammed down in the bed like forcefully. And then that's when the paralysis started.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I really can't explain it.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, I'm not an expert on sleep paralysis, but from the
Right.
guests that I have spoken with, it appears to me that usually you happen to wake up in the middle of the night and you're paralyzed. And then some people can kind of end up having out of body experiences if they can control it.
Right. Yeah. I ended up figuring out what it was. I mean, I actually, because of, I figured out, well, I didn't figure out, I ended up just accidentally learning how to lucid dream. And through the lucid dreaming, the dream world becomes an alternate reality where you can, like, basically you're in another avatar, you can explore and look around. And I had this control to where I could like rewind and fast forward. It was like almost like your dream was like a movie, right? And I just had full control over it. And I started, I was so fascinated by it that I would just like explore this newfound ability, right? And see what I could do and how much control I had. And it didn't work all the time. It was only the very, very vivid dreams that like I still question if it was even a dream or not, because it was such like it was literally like being in another reality. But whenever I was playing around with those abilities, I would notice um, this out of place person in my dream. They would kind of phase into the dream, and they would always, like a scary movie, they would like get closer to me. And then upon like getting close to me and touching me, that's when I would wake up paralyzed with this thing on top of me, right? And it happened a few times before. I'm like, well, instead of like running from this thing in the dream, why don't I just wake myself up? If I have so much control of the dream, why don't I just wake myself out of the dream? So it happened again. In the dream, there was this like tall man in overalls like going after me, and I was running from him, and I hid in this closet. And and he found me, and just as he was about to grab me, I woke myself up. I was like, wake up. And I woke myself up, and sure as right next to me was a shadow being in the middle of climbing on top of me. I woke up and literally caught him. I could see it as clear as I'm looking at you right now. And this thing, literally, I couldn't see a facial expression, but I could tell it was just as shocked as I was. It was not expecting me to wake up and perceive it. And when it noticed that I noticed it, it just glided around the foot of my bed and left the room. And then I was like, holy, I'm like, this isn't just a dream anymore. This is something physical in my bedroom. This is something tangible that's happening. This isn't some like astral thing that's just happening in a dream state. It's appearing in the dream state as this intruder, right? But it's an actual entity that's in my physical home, in my bedroom, climbing on top of me. And we all hear of the tales of sleep paralysis with something sitting on top of your chest. I mean, I literally witnessed it. And then I started doing that every time. I would see him and then wake up, and there would be an entity or a shadow person or in some way, shape, or form, something would be there always that I could perceive. And I started waking myself up sooner and sooner, earlier and earlier, until eventually I would just see the intrusion, wake up, do a clearing, go back to sleep, and I stopped getting attacked because I was able to identify it and clear it. But then they got tricky, and it was like a game of like adapt and overcome for both of us, because then they started showing up as family members in my dream. So it'd be like my dead mother would show up in my dream, and I thought I was having this beautiful experience with her, and then she would like morph into this demon and attack me, and I would wake up paralyzed. And they did this with my grandmother and my mother until I caught on to that. So I couldn't even trust seeing my own family members in the dream. And then they started showing up as like animals, and I would like pet an animal, and same thing would happen. They were just finding new ways to lure me towards them. Then they figured out a way to cloak themselves entirely, and I would have like family members showing up in the dream, like pointing at something that I couldn't see. And I'm like, what? You got to keep in mind, this is like such a lucid experience. And I'm like, don't know what they're pointing at. Next thing you know, I'm getting attacked. And I'm like, oh, they're entirely cloaked and somebody's coming to warn me. And then I figured out that, then they started showing up as solid objects, like a clock. The first thing that was, it was like this beautiful grandfather clock. In my dream, it was just so mesmerizing. I had to go touch it. When I touched it, boom, morphs into a demon and attacks me. Then, I come across these CIA. In 2017, they declassified 13 million CIA documents. One of the documents talks about dream warfare and how they literally have the ability to send people after you in your dreams. And this isn't a theory anymore. Like, we have actual documents for it now. And it's just amazing to think that, the CIA is sitting on all this technology, which is, walking through walls patents that talk about changing the frequency of your body and getting into a meditative state and matching the frequency of the wall and walking through a wall and all these incredible things that you would think are from sci-fi. Now we have 13 million documents to verify it. So I'm like, maybe that's what was happening to me. It's almost like somebody was sent after me. And I don't know to what end, but it was like draining me energetically. Like I was living life at 50%. Like I was so drained from fighting off these attacks every night. Like I missed countless days of work because I just wasn't sleeping. At one point, I was so afraid to even fall asleep. I would force myself to stay awake with like energy drinks and all this stuff, you know. It was a bad place, but I got out of all of it. But it was just, I mean, it was pretty amazing what I ended up discovering and what they're capable of. And dream walking is a psionic ability that the CIA even teaches, where they can literally teach people to get into a meditative state and astral project, and they describe it in their own document as like going down, like basically flying through the neighborhood, and each house has like a bubble over it, and each bubble is somebody's dream. And you can just walk into somebody's dream. You penetrate that bubble astrally, right? This is an ability that the CIA teaches their agents. So I'm at the receiving end of all this in real time, like don't know what's going on. And turns out there's like documents to prove it all.
Do you think it's possible that in your dream state you were going to lower astral realms and that's why you were attacked so much? And if you would have went to an upper one, it would have been different?
You know, that's an amazing question that no one's ever asked me. Um, it's quite possible. I don't rule anything out. Like I don't claim to know it all. I just know what I experienced. But maybe I was somehow just entering this lower astral without realizing it. And maybe that's because, well, I realized also like the lifestyle I was living after my mother passed away. Unfortunately, I resorted to like drugs and alcohol and a lot of sex and partying and all that stuff, which is where I was just constantly opening myself up to these lower frequencies. I didn't know it back then, but now it makes perfect sense looking back. Like, oh, I was just constantly living in that frequency and I was inviting it in. So that was a big lesson too. I had to like clean myself up, clean my act up and my life, and just get out of that grieving frequency, right? Because when you're in that lower state, it was described to me like when you lose somebody and there's a traumatic event in your life, there's a fracture in your aura, right? Your auric field, it's like a crack in an egg, and this basically your light shines through that crack into the lower astral or wherever the astral realm, where what's been described as like bottom feeders, like they're looking for somebody to attach to. So it like maybe I was just like saying, "Look here, here I am," you know. And these entities that roam the lower astral, it's a feeding ground for them, right? They're always constantly harvesting loose and you know, taking advantage of people trauma, and so maybe that's what it was. I never thought about it the way you asked, as far as me just always entering a dream state in the lower astral. That's interesting.
Have you had any contact with your mother from the other side?
Yeah, yeah. So that's how I knew like they didn't actually capture her because on a number of occasions she would show up and I would have such real beautiful experiences with her too that didn't turn into an attack. That I would wake up like laughing and in tears, and you know things would even happen like physically. You know how you see a ghost or something moves or a picture frame is just somewhere else, like little subtle signs that she was around. And then you know through different sessions from people and mediums and stuff like uh she showed up a number of times to let me know like that she's okay, and yeah, she's still around and she's safe and still healing and growing just like all souls do.
Tell us about how you started having contact with the Greys and any other ETs.
Well, it was kind of the same way. So it all started, well, okay, the Greys actually, what I would call the Greys, the very first time I ever saw them, it wasn't a negative, it wasn't a typical gray like we all see, like the stereotypical gray. It just looked similar. Um, and this is a pretty wild story, but everything that happened was wild. So during this time in my life, while all this dark stuff was happening, there was like this like positive stuff that was starting to like show up a little bit. Like as I was kind of going through my awakening, like good things were happening too to show me like there's a way, there's also light. It's not all dark, because prior to this, I didn't believe in anything, right? So, you know, the dark through the darkness is how I found the light. And then that's when some beautiful things started happening. And in one case, I woke up, something like felt like it woke me up, and I was just laying in bed and I saw literally what looked like a hologram of a gray ET head, just like in my room. It sounds silly, but that's what I saw. And it just told me like telepathically, close your eyes. And I closed my eyes and I was up on what I would assume is a ship. I didn't see anything but the room I was in. And I was on this table and I had like there was like these golden energy bars like holding me down. It wasn't like I was strapped down forcefully. And there were these little grays. They looked like little hybrid grays. And there was like three of them on each side of me. They had three fingers each. And I'm laying there. It's like the room, the entire room looked glowing white. Like the walls were just glowing themselves. And all I could really see was their silhouettes. It was so bright. And it looked like a dome shaped room from what I remember. And it looked like they were doing Reiki energy healing on me. Like they were just like passing over my body and like doing all this work. And I'm like asking like a million questions a minute. Like, who are you? Where am I? What's going on? But like, but it's all telepathic, right? You just somehow know how. And like, they were just, none of my questions were answered. They were just like busy working. But the problem was that I was still very much aware that my physical body was in bed, but my consciousness was up on the ship, right? And the vibration that I was experiencing was so intense. Like this is gonna sound funny. It was so intense that my boxers were like riding up my legs and like giving me a wedgie, and I couldn't hold it. Like it was such an intense vibration. Like being consciously aware that they were doing this to me on the ship, my consciousness, but my physical body's in bed. And I told them, I was like, "Hey guys, like I'm gonna pee my pants, right?" And next thing I know, the connection was cut and I got up and I went to the bathroom. But the whole time I went to the bathroom, it felt like something was attached to the top of my head, like this cord. It was tingling, like intensely tingling. And I went to the bathroom and I came back and I saw my dog laying in bed. She looked like she was sedated. I mean, she was like out. And it was noticeable, right? And I laid back down, not thinking anything else was going to happen. And I closed my eyes and then boom, I'm back up on the ship again. And they're still doing their thing. And for a couple more minutes, and I just figured they weren't going to answer any of my questions. So I was just laying there observing them. And they were just very slowly moving their fingers over me and just like a Reiki healer would do. And then this guy walks in from my right in a lab coat, but he looked like this insectoid, like hybrid insectoid being, and very humanoid, kind of looked like a mixture of an ant and a praying mantis, but he was like humanoid, and he had a lab coat on. And he walked in, and they stepped out of the way, and he came up next to the bed, and he looked me right in the eyes, and just like an eye doctor would with a light, like he got there and he went back and forth, looking into my eyes, like as if he was like looking into my soul or something. And I'm just following his eyes. And then he just kind of scanned over my body and he looked at the little guys and he gave him like a nod. And then he walked away and then the whole experience ended. And then I was just back there in my bed. And the whole kicker about this thing is that the next day I just happened to have a Reiki session already scheduled with my Reiki healer at the time. Did a normal session. It was just an alignment. I didn't tell her anything. The next day, at the end of the session, she told me, she's almost the strangest thing I saw whenever I was working on you. She's like, I saw you were up on a ship, and I knew we were on a ship because I was able to like look out the window and see the stars and Earth. And and she said you were strapped to a table and with these golden energy bars. And she was like, these little gray aliens were working on you. And I asked them what they were doing to you, and they said that they were infusing crystal into your skull, like I mean, not skull. Well, maybe the base of my skull, but my spine, etherically. And she asked, well, why are you doing that? And they told her that um, we're all transitioning from carbon-based to crystalline beings, and our physical vessels weren't adapting to the new frequencies quick enough. So people all around the world, they were basically assisting their physical body in this transition, in this ascension. So they were infusing this crystal into my spine to prepare me for what was coming on the planet, basically. And I was just blown away. And then I told her what happened to me the night before, and she was blown away. And we were just like comparing these notes, and it was pretty amazing. So, I mean, that was just one experience.
Did she or the ETs inform you about what is coming?
From that session, no, there was nothing, none of that. It was just wherever we're going, whatever new frequencies we're moving into, apparently our bodies weren't adapting quick enough. And it was like, you hear about like ascension symptoms and all that stuff. Apparently our physical body, we just needed some help. We needed some help because like we're going too quickly into these frequencies, and we're constantly bombarded by this frequency warfare down here that's keeping us in this lower state, right? So it was, they're just helping, I guess.
All right, you have a new book out called Bleedthrough, and in that book, you write about being on Mars.
Well, no, I didn't. I've never went to Mars. It's called. It was a Mars recruitment, and a Mars recruitment attempt. And actually, I wrote about the stories I just told. I wrote about in great detail in the book as well. So what happened was in 2017, I was still working construction, and it was like at the tail end of all this stuff I'm telling you about. And it was still happening, but this was like right around that time. This guy that I used to be, we worked together, we carpooled together, we were good friends at work and stuff. And uh, I just knew his name was Larry. I've known him for years. He was we're in construction, so you're not always on the same job site. He was on a separate job site than me. And I heard one day that Larry got escorted off the job. These government vehicles came and escorted him off the job, and they took him away. They were all blacked out vehicles. Nobody knew what happened. What happened to Larry? Everyone was just kind of assuming that he did something and got caught. And finally, they caught up to him. And a month went by, and I didn't hear from him. Nobody heard. It was just kind of speculation. Nobody knew. And then he started posting this wild stuff on Facebook that was totally out of character for him, which I understand now looking back. It was like he had some sort of an awakening or something. He was sharing all this information that like that would look crazy from the outside, but it's really just he was just kind of figuring out that, the government corruption and all this stuff. I'm not going to get into because some of it might not be appropriate, but it was quite literally making him look crazy in the eyes of the construction workers. And one of the things that he started posting about was that he was going to go to Mars. And it was like this, and then everybody just thought he lost his mind. He kept saying, made a few posts about going to Mars. I can't wait to get off this rock, blah, blah, blah. This silly stuff. Everyone just wrote him off as nuts. And during this time, I woke up one Saturday morning. I was going to take my dog for a walk at the park. And I hadn't seen Larry since I heard he'd been taken off the job site. He wasn't working anymore. And I go, I go to this park. I park in the parking lot, and I look over, and I'm 2 spots over from Larry. And I look over, I'm like, Larry? And he's like, you showed up. And I'm like, what do you mean I showed up? He's like, you don't think you're here by accident, do you? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I had no idea what he was talking about. And we got out of the car, and I was like, what happened to you? What happened on the job? And he's like, well, I can't. He goes, I got to watch what I say. See that guy over there by the tree? He's been following me all morning. I'm like, what do you mean? He's an agent or whatever. He's got an earpiece. You can see it. And like, as soon as he said that, this guy like adjusted his earpiece, and like he was over in the weirdest place out in the middle of nowhere, like stretching. And I was like, what's going on? And then this is a whole long story. I'll try to summarize it, but so he told me he was arrested for making basically just some outrageous claims about something. Once he showed me the newspaper article, like to prove to me that he wasn't lying, like I knew, okay, that makes sense, right? So, and then these people started talking to him in his head. He started hearing voices in his head, and I didn't know about to skull technology or voice of God technology back then, but now looking back, I believe he was absolutely a victim of that technology being used on him. But he was hearing these voices in his head that were telling him all these crazy things about everything. Every conspiracy theory, like I didn't know any of this stuff at the time, but he started basically telling me like they control our weather. There's underground cities. There's this whole cabal and this deep state and these. He said told me about clones and weather warfare, and he said that they don't even need like this guy that's following him, listening to him with the earpiece. He said they don't even need that. He's just a scare tactic because they're listening to us from the satellites right now. He started telling me about these timelines, this timeline war that was happening. He said there's more than one timeline going on, And he said you can tell what's going on in the other timeline if you look at the sports video games. Like if you're a video game, like he said, just one example. He's like, like if you're a hockey, he used NHL games as an example. And he said, you know how every year they have a vote for the cover for the next for the game. Well, the vote is just a cover because they don't know which timeline is going to be solidified. And on the other timeline, the guy who makes the cover of the game in that timeline wins the Stanley Cup. So he said the cover that doesn't get voted in, you know that that team won the Stanley Cup on the other timeline. He was telling me all this stuff. I'm like, dude, what is going on? Like, I don't know if I believed him or not, you know. And then he told me that he was being recruited to go to Mars, that he was told that the world was going to end in Labor Day of 2017, and that select people were being chosen to go basically preserve humanity on Mars. This is what he told me. Like, I just ran into him at the park and he was just dumping all this stuff on me. And it turned into a whole summer of him trying to get me to go to Mars with him.
What about your contact with Bigfoot?
Yeah, that happened in 2018, or when did I first go to East Eddy Ranch? Are you familiar with East Eddy Ranch up in Washington State?
Who's the guy that runs that? I forgot his name.
James Gilliland.
Yeah, I'm aware of it, but I've never
Right.
been there.
Yeah, so it was 2019 actually. I went there for the first time, and you know, for a conference. I had heard about his conferences, and that's one of the things that goes on there is Sasquatch activity. And he you know, he was telling us all these stories about everybody that comes out there. Like they'll either see Bigfoot or they'll have some weird interactions. Well, the very first night we were there, we were camping in a tent, and I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we heard it was about 1 in the morning, I guess, and we heard this whack like on the tree next to our tent, like this loud whack, and we heard two footsteps, like loud, like heavy footsteps, and like a grunt, like a, and then nothing. And like I'm unzipping the tent to go see, and she's like, "Where are you going?" And she's like, "Don't go out there." I was like, I want to see what that was." And I couldn't see, you know, I didn't see anything besides the fact that there's this big giant log laying next to the tree, right? That wasn't there before, like whatever he used to hit the tree. And then, you know, we fell asleep that night. And then that morning I woke up to like the most blood curdling growl, like vocalization I've ever heard in my life. Like I can't even mimic it. And every hair stood up on my body. And I was like, and it stayed standing. Like I was like, what in the heck was that? You know, freaked me out. And I woke up and she's over there sound asleep. And I didn't know what to think. But it was so real. I was just like, what the hell was that? And then I woke up and asked everybody, like no one else heard anything. And I thought, so I asked James, I'm like, does that ever happen? Like I swear to God, I heard this thing. And he's like, yeah, that happens. Sometimes they can like, they're multi-dimensional beings. They can create an experience for a specific person. It doesn't have to be like, we can't even begin to understand how they operate, you know? And then that was the beginning of it. And then I've been back to East Eddy many times since then. And they started messing with me. Like you would just get poked in the neck or touched, like, but nothing would be there. And it was to the point where like, come on, what's going on here? And it would happen to a lot of people out there. And so that happened to me one day. And that night we decided to go out and go squatching, you know. And I walked out into the field. I was with two other people. We asked for permission to go past this fence. Like James is always like, make sure that you get permission before you wouldn't just want somebody walking into your front door. So make sure you ask them for permission, right? So I walked through and we walked through the gate, and right away we had something thrown at us, like out of the tree line. And we couldn't like see who threw it, but we heard something thrown at us, like a little pebble or something. And we're standing out there. My friend Ben just happened to be filming with his night vision. Like he was just periodically filming, and he just happened to capture this. I literally, like, I felt something come and put its whole hand on my back, like this giant hand on my upper back. And I turned around. I'm like, holy shit, what was that? You know, and the girl screamed, and Ben's like, whoa, whoa, you know. And I was like, something just touched my back, like straight up. It like pushed me almost. And I turned around so fast, and uh, we were talking about it. We were all excited. So we played back the tape to watch. And as soon as I felt something touch my back, you see like this orb fly past my back. But what we were more surprised about was we picked up audio that we didn't hear in real time. You could literally hear something walking up to me, crunching through the dry grass on the camera that none of us heard in real time. You hear crunch, 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 and then that orb passes, and then I turn around, and it's all on. We got it all captured on film, and I could even send you the video if you want. But it's if you turn the volume way up, you can hear it. And it was just amazing that like I know I felt it, but to have the validation captured on camera of these footsteps, but nothing that like the camera didn't pick up anything visibly, but it picked up the audio of this thing walking, which I guess it was like I think it has to alter its density slightly so it can actually we can actually feel them when they touch us. Like they have to lower their density to be perceived in this reality. And I think that's what was going on.
While you were there at the ranch, did you see any UFOs?
Oh, every night, like almost every night. Like it was amazing to me because I don't know if it's like the collective consciousness of the group that like enters everyone into a higher frequency to where it's just more perceivable, or if that ranch is just a hotspot in general. Because I mean, you can go outside the ranch and you won't see like nearly as much as you are when you're there on the ground. And it was pretty amazing. Like anybody that's ever been out there, like if you still walk away a skeptic after that, like you're just you're just trying not to believe at that point, you know.
Were you seeing energy orbs or something that looked like a triangular ship or something else?
Yeah, just or more or less light ships, I would say. Pretty high up. Some of them were lower. I caught one in the middle of the day, um, which what was my favorite sighting because it was a day sighting. It was like a cigar craft, and there's Mount Adams out there. And there was like three of us watching it. Everyone else was in the conference listening to the speaker, and there was like three of us outside on this deck. And it was broad daylight, mid-afternoon, and I saw this what looked like a cigar craft, and it was just kind of hovering there, and then it would go behind the mountain, and then it would come back out, and it would go behind the mountain and come back out, and we were just like, oh my god, and like three of us were trying to film it, and only one phone was actually picking it up, and it just looked like a tiny dot. It was totally insignificant on the footage, but it was there with our visible eyes very clearly. And my friend made a comment. He's like, it looks like it's waiting for clearance to get into the mountain, you know? And we watched this thing, this cigar craft in broad daylight, go behind the mountain, come back out for like 10 minutes until it finally just literally went into the mountain and then never showed up again. So that was like the most physical craft we saw, but usually at night it's more like a light ship up higher in the sky.
A lot of the experience that have happened to you has been during dreams. Why do you think it's something that's really happening and not just dreams?
I was waking myself up out of these lucid dreams, and there was a physical thing in my room that I could perceive, right? And then, so that's how I started. But then, as like I would have these insane memories that I was like on a military base somewhere, and like it would be a full on memory that as I woke up, more and more became clear, and like it didn't seem like a dream. It was like this memory would come back from I don't even know where it was from, and it wasn't until like I was able to go and physically identify some of the buildings that was having dreams about. And like one night, I specifically remember being taken out of my bed, and I was woke up in the back of this SUV, and we taken to these two buildings in Illinois, and I knew we were in Illinois just because I'm familiar. I live right next to Illinois here, and the buildings, like I didn't know where I was, but I just somehow knew I was in Illinois. And this whole thing happened. I write about it in the book, but I remember waking up the next morning with that full memory. Like it wasn't a dream. Like I had this memory that I was just at these buildings, and I found out that it was a Boeing facility. A friend of mine's a delivery driver, and we connected the dots. And the memory was so vivid, I literally drew pictures of the buildings. Like I was like, this wasn't a dream. I know this was a memory. I was taken. Something happened. I don't know how to explain it. So I drew pictures of the buildings. My friend's a delivery driver. He said, that looks like a Boeing facility. I know those buildings. And so I got on Google Earth, looked it up. There's a Boeing facility in Southern Illinois, 42 minutes from my house. And I drove straight out there, and I was literally almost like in tears because that was exactly the buildings I was taken to that I had the memory from, and down to very specific details. And I compared the drawing and the photo in the book, and I was just like, "What's going on here?" That's why I call my book "Bleed Through Tales from Another Timeline," because I'm like, how could this have happened in my reality at the same time, like while I'm in bed? Right? Unless we're talking about some other type of technology or people are being brought like other timelines, other dimensions. I explore it all as like potentials in the book. Like I'm not claiming that that's what's happening, but we have to start asking these questions because none of this stuff was adding up. And like there's no real 3D scientific explanation for what was happening to me unless we explore these concepts that are actually becoming more and more mainstream now as like quantum physicists are getting more traction and the quantum field is being widely accepted. And that's what led me into that research, quantum physics and the many worlds theory or interpretation of quantum mechanics and superposition and single position and all that stuff about this infinite versions of ourselves and infinite realities and all this stuff. And there's multiple versions of us living simultaneously. And I'm like, well, maybe like some of these memories I'm getting are actually bleeding through from these other versions of us that are allegedly existing all simultaneously. So that's what sent me on that rabbit hole was that one experience going and finding those two buildings. And I'm like, this isn't a dream. And there was a number of other things, not just the buildings, but in when I had the memory of being taken to those buildings, I specifically remember seeing a construction site across the field. And I even saw the name of the company of the construction site. And when I went back to go find those buildings, when I found them on Google Earth and went and found them, I didn't even pay attention when I pulled in. I drove right past the construction site that I remember in the same damn company. Like there's so many things that added up. So like I either had to been taken from my bed in the middle of the night and brought to these buildings and then brought back and mind wiped, or something happened. But it came in the form like if you didn't know any better, you would think you just had a dream about it, right? But I could tell something was just like pushing me to look further into it and look further into it. And I did. And that's why I started coming up with the whole theory for my book.
Do you have people in your dreams that you've never met in real life?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's absolutely the case sometimes. Sometimes I do recognize people, but most of the time I don't know who they are, you know,
What can you tell us about time travel?
quite a bit. What do you want to know? So I are you familiar with Sean David Morton at all?
Yeah, I remember. Is he still alive?
No, he just passed away, unfortunately.
I remember the name from the old Art Bell days.
Yep, absolutely. That's him. So he wrote a book called the Sands of Time series, which is about the origins of time travel within the shadow government. And he claims that the books were basically written based off of documents and diaries, manuscripts he was given by this man who worked 40 years in the shadow government. And those books literally flipped my world upside down. When I read those books and like, because Sean matter of factly says, like, you can read this as a sci-fi novel, but this is a true story. And it was just ringing all the bells. Like it was resonating so deeply that those books actually inspired me to start exploring, the history of time travel and stuff. And what I found interesting in the book is Sean talks about this Navy black site in the Nevada desert where basically was the original facility where our secret space program was birthed from, is the way he says it in the book. But he said, with standing in the center of that facility underground is a ancient Mayan statue, and I can't even begin to pronounce the name of this ruler, whoever he was. But the reason they built a facility around this statue is because, according to Sean, it was the first known recorded time traveler based on whoever deciphered the hieroglyphs. Like he was a known time traveler among the private sector, the shadow government, right? So they built this facility like to honor the predecessors and it was basically these early time travel technologies that were the basis for the secret space program, that's operating parallel to NASA and has been since World War II. But so I found that interesting. But then you go back to like Nikola Tesla, he was experimenting with time travel and the Tesla teleporter, which you can go read about, where he was able to literally teleport something to the other side of the room. And then in the Sands of Time material, it talks about the Philadelphia experiment, which I'm sure you've heard of, the USS Eldridge, and like phasing out of time and then coming back into reality, and everybody got frozen into the hull of the ship. Well, in the book, it kind of gives the history of that. Apparently, Einstein and Tesla were involved with that project, and they did a few dry runs without people, and they were unsuccessful. And the Navy was adamant on like doing a test with people. And Tesla and Einstein were like, no, there's no way this is ready. You're going to kill people. And they did it anyway. Einstein and Tesla walked away. They wiped their hands clean. You guys do what you want. What they were working with was what the book describes as dimensional shift technology, which allows a vessel to basically shift and travel in another dimension. It's not necessarily disappearing, it's traveling in another dimension and then coming back. And I met a guy, a quantum physicist, just recently while I was in Sedona, an 85-year-old quantum physicist who worked for the shadow government and specifically worked on the Philadelphia experiment. He was brought in to help perfect this technology so people wouldn't get frozen in the walls, right? And he told me that what was happening was the technology worked, but they lacked a psychic navigator, a remote viewer. And when you don't know where you're going, when you're trying to teleport something and you don't know where you're going, you could easily end up inside of a solid object because you dematerialize when you jump. So he was brought in to help perfect this technology. And he said that not only did they perfect it, they took it from the size of a room and got it all the way down to the size of a credit card. And he said every ship, every spacecraft in the private sector, the secret space program, they all have one of these installed. And he said that's how they travel. So dimensional shift technology that basically renders them invisible when they travel. So they don't even have to cloak themselves because the technology literally allows them to travel in another dimension. But that's talked about in the book, and then it goes into the Nazi bell, which you might be familiar with, the Nazi bell in World War II that disappeared from the skies in Germany right at the end of World War II. There's a bell-shaped UFO, and in the book, the way it's described is that it was a reverse engineered, or it was an alien craft that they were trying to turn back on. They didn't even know what it was, and they had it at this top secret underground facility in Germany. They were spending years trying to get this thing working, right? And they finally did whatever they did. They were able to power it up. And the first successful test, it disappeared from the sky above the facility, and nobody knew where it went. And the interesting thing about it was that Project Paperclip happened after that, where all these German scientists were embedded into the American infrastructure and put at the head of all these corporations, including the NASA program and all that. Well, in 1965, there's a Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, the Kecksburg UFO incident, where a bell-shaped craft crashed into the woods there in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Well, according to the Sands of Time material, that was the Nazi bell, time traveled 20 years into the future. It didn't just disappear from Germany over that facility. It literally time traveled into the future from 1945 to 1965, crash landed in the woods, and the paperclip scientists that were on the crash recovery, the UFO crash retrieval team, they knew exactly what it was when it landed. And so we're talking about things that shouldn't even exist. Like they were discovering time travel back then, but they didn't know exactly what they were doing. And in doing so, when they're trying to make these jumps, they were creating these dimensional rifts, like these tears in space time, essentially. They were quite literally opening holes for these what they would call temporal invaders, where UFOs were literally flying into our reality from another dimension, where they were literally ripping a hole in space time when they were experimenting with this technology. So that would explain, according to the books, the UFO flaps in the 40s and 50s, the sudden spike in UFOs. It's because them playing with this time travel technology was ripping holes in our dimension. And these UFOs were just coming in from these other dimensions. So they built HARP. And what they were trying to do originally with that was to seal up these holes by putting a frequency net over the country or over even to the whole planet at one point. It didn't work, but they ended up discovering that they can control the weather with it, which is its primary, focus today. So there's a lot of history there that we don't even understand. And then with the, the Vril Society and Maria Orsic and the Chandlers and the Vril Dahmen, and that's a whole interesting history about how they were channeling blueprints to build these flying saucers after World War II or during World War II, which is also in the Sands of Time material in book 6. It's the interlude where he takes a break from like this story, and it's the direct diary of this German scientist, verbatim. And I think a lot of people think this is what got Sean killed, was releasing this diary. And you could read like verbatim what this man wrote about working with these Vril channeling these UFO schematics and building UFOs for the Nazis. And it's all like in great detail. One of the most incredible things anybody will ever read. It fills in 30 years of missing history that we're not supposed to know about. In that book, they talk about reverse engineering. Well, not necessarily reverse engineering, but building these blueprints that were being channeled. And they built the flying saucer and they were able to power it up, but they didn't know where it was drawing its power from. They still didn't even know how it worked. They built it and they still didn't understand it. And that's how we even came up with the Schumann resonance. Because what's his name? Otto Schumann, the scientist who discovered the Schumann resonance. He was on uh, that team of engineers that were building the UFO, the flying saucer. And it was him, while he was discovering or investigating where this flying saucer was drawing its energy from, is when he discovered that the Earth was resonating at 7.83 hertz, which is what he dubbed as the Schumann resonance. And that's where we even got that from, because they were trying to figure out how this UFO worked. So it's a fascinating story of time travel. And these craft, they realize that they aren't just working on an advanced propulsion system like we all think in anti-gravity. They use like directional gravitics, what they call, to steer it, but they're quite literally time machines that like you can be gone in a craft for an hour but be missing for days on Earth, or vice versa. They were all these time anomalies were happening when they were doing these test flights, and they couldn't figure it out until they finally perfected it. And but they realized you're not just like traveling like in a UFO. These are time machines and dimensionally shifting as well, traveling in other dimensions. So it's an entire crazy history that we have to start taking a little more seriously. And that's all broken down in my book as well in great detail.
Do you feel that there is a spiritual war going on right now?
Yeah, I think that's kind of it was at my doorstep when I was going through all the sleep paralysis stuff and those attacks. And there was a number of other things that happened we haven't discussed, but I came to the realization that, matter of factly, in my reality, there is a spiritual war because I was fighting it. I mean, it was something I had to learn how to believe in God and literally surround myself in these, spheres of white light and put up spiritual protection and call on help and the ascended masters and our Archangel Michael and all that stuff. People may believe in it or not, but it helped me by me believing in that and utilizing those tools. It helped me overcome that darkness I found myself literally in a fight for my life multiple times, what felt like a fight for my life, because I would wake up and under attack, and it was quite literally the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced. But I had to realize, like, listen, I'm the only way I'm going to overcome this. If the only way I'm going to overcome the unexplainable is by finding a way to explain it. And that's what sent me on a path. I just went down the rabbit hole. I was like, I can't live like this forever. There's got to be something I can do. And that's when I started learning how to protect myself and call in help and invoking the name of Jesus, which I never did in the early days until I found from interviewing whistleblowers that it's forbidden to say the name Jesus in an underground military base, that you're not allowed to say it because they're ran by reptilians. And if you do, you'll get reprimanded. So, because they're ran by essentially demons, and or at least demons working through people and these reptilians. You interviewed Daryl James. He's one of the guys who experienced that firsthand. But when I heard that story, I'm like, well, I'm going to start invoking the name of Jesus whenever I'm getting attacked. And it worked. They can't exist in that frequency. Whoever Jesus was, whatever's going on there, the Christ consciousness is powerful and it's real. It holds power. And these dark lower astral beings, they cannot exist in that frequency and they have to leave. I mean, it's just that simple.
What is the main takeaway a reader should get from Bleedthrough?
Well, I would say, the way I introduced the book is I don't want people to believe me. I ask them to drop into their heart before they start reading it and just pay attention to their body and notice how the information makes them feel. I don't want them to just believe me at face value. And if it feels right and if it resonates, then, then lean into that. But if it doesn't, then it doesn't. So be it. I'm not claiming that anything I say is the absolute truth. As a matter of fact, I mentioned that many times. I'm like, I'm not trying to tell people. I'm just sharing my experience. And basically, my whole goal is to just open people's minds and help them see reality through a new lens. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everything I'm saying is true, because I could very easily be proven wrong about a lot of stuff that I think I know now because I have in the past. Like, that's just how the awakening works. You learn, you unlearn, you learn, you unlearn. Like, you can't marry yourselves to these beliefs and ideas because you'll just get stuck in the mud. And like, we have to constantly allow space to learn and be able to let go and have the humility to self-correct whenever we are proven wrong. So the takeaway is I would love for people to read it and, and just let themselves feel what that information, how they respond to that information. And I would love for them to just see it, use it as an experiment, right? Because everybody's just like putting information out there and like, this is this is that. I don't want to do that. I really, it's like, I want people to learn how to use their intuition and tap into their own discernment, because your body, like, the truth resonates at a specific frequency and so does deception. And your body responds to that. And if you know your body and you're self-aware enough to understand that something is ringing true, then you know how your body responds to the truth. Once you know yourself, you know how your body responds to a lie. So you can read something or watch a video and notice how your body's responding to it, get out of your mind, and it'll help you navigate these times whenever everything's just littered with deception and misinformation. And you know how it is. The waters have been so muddied at this point, nobody knows what to believe. And how do you know what to believe? You have to go within, get to know yourself, be self-aware, and pay attention to how your body responds when it hears and sees this information.
Is your podcast Journey to the Truth an extension of your book or something completely different?
Well, it's just a podcast about the awakening. And, we cover every conspiracy theory, alternative health, UFO experiencer testimony, secret space programs, government cover-ups, you name it. There's basically nothing that we won't approach. We won't tackle it because we like to have these conversations. It's not, the book came, we've been doing the podcast for 5 years before the book came. So I would say the book is more an extension of the podcast. Basically, everything I've learned along the way from interviewing all these people, plus my personal experiences. So the book is just my personal experiences. We're coupled with corroborating research, and basically just, I just want to lay it on the table and let the reader decide.
Now, you're also part of putting on the Rebels of Disclosure conference. Am I saying that correctly? Is that what it's titled?
Yep. Yeah. So we, 4 years ago, we started doing a conference, a disclosure conference. It started off in 2022 as a secret space conference. We just specifically covered the secret space program in the first conference. It did very well. We decided we didn't want to just stay there. We wanted to expand and talk about everything. So it's grown into something else. At this point, we call it the Rebels of Disclosure. It's just a fun name, but really we cover anything that we cover on the podcast. We just take our favorite speakers that we've had, the favorite guest, and we give them a chance to, present on stage and tell their story. And it's much more than that. It's a beautiful resort in Grafton, Illinois, tucked away in the woods along the river. It's a lodge, so there's like cabins, and it's just a beautiful place. And we do bonfires every night and sky watches, so what we see, and a lot of paranormal Sasquatch activity out there too. A lot of people have fun with it. So, and then afterwards we go to the Cahokia Mounds, which you may or may not know about. It's a ancient mound site, technically pyramid site in North America. It was once the largest civilization in North America at one time, and it's kind of like flying under the radar, but it's amazing. And if you don't know about it, you should look into it. And we did a whole documentary on it, which can be found on our website. But We go there every year after the conference as like a little excursion. We do an activation, and it's a lot of fun. So if anybody's interested, you can go to journeytotruth.online and grab a ticket and come check it out. And if you can't make it in person, we have virtual passes. You can just buy an online pass and check it out that way.
When is the event?
May 12th through the 15th. So it's right around the corner.
All right. Well, if people want to find out more about your book or they want to ask you questions, do they also go to that same website or a different one?
Yeah, everything we do is under that website. So journeytotruth.online, you can find my book, the podcast, the conference, our documentaries, our webinars. My co-host, he wrote a book as well. It's on there. Everything's under one roof. So, or you can email us, which is also on the website, but email us at journeytotruthpodcast@gmail.com.
Well, before we wrap it up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Don't focus on the negative stuff happening right now, because you're going to perpetuate more of that. And that's by design. There's a lot of what I call black pillars and doom and gloom information that people like to focus on the negative side of reality, right? But where your attention goes, energy flows. So you're just going to feed into more of that negative timeline. So I encourage everyone to be present and go out into nature and start creating a positive reality that you want to see for yourself. That the stuff that's happening, all these surface level distractions, they're exactly that. They're just distractions. And if you focus on that, it's literally going to siphon you dry. It's going to suck you dry. And you're going to be, you're going to be finding yourself worried and living in a fear state, and you're never going to grow there. So I would encourage people to just put those distractions, push them aside, stop doom scrolling on social media, and go outside, get into nature, and let the world show you how beautiful it really is, because it is a beautiful place. But if you turn on the TV, it's not. And that's by design. But you can go outside and talk to your neighbors and go on vacations and trips, and you can create the most beautiful life for yourself. But it's never going to happen if you believe everything that they tell you on the news. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Tyler, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.